Good evening, viewers. We will be talking about India as a non aligned nation and its relevance in the present times, in the present context, wherein we are now seeing a new strategic equation, a new political equation coming up around us. India had adopted in 1947 onwards a non aligned policy that was to stay away from both the power blocks. And this was a policy that had a vision and a wisdom behind it, which was suited to India, keeping in view the conditions it had been going through at that time. Over a period of time, the policy of non alignment did show polarities or leanings towards a particular power bloc. And as we all know, that for a long time, India was inclined towards the Soviet Union, now Russia. And this was required because Russia or former Soviet Union has always remained and always been a true friend of India. They have stood with India, they gave India technology, they helped India in setting up the steel plants like Bokaro and Bhilai. And in other words, they supported India during those formative years in setting up an infrastructure. Now, today, what India has achieved, the position that India has, there is a significant role that the non aligned policy has played in this context. Because with the having stayed away from the two power blocks, that is the Western bloc, which consisted of the neo imperialist nations, and the Eastern bloc, that was the communist bloc. India was able to frame and move on a line that was a sort of a middle fold path. We can be called a middle fold path where they ensured that their economy, their interests, and their entire development is comprehensive. And Soviet Union, with their support, was able to give India that support and that infrastructure, that guidance towards developing that infrastructure that was most needed. And of course, during the 1971 war, when the entire imperialist world, led by the US, UK, and the four, out of the five, the four permanent members of the United Nations had been against India. But for the Soviet veto, India perhaps would have found it tough winning the 71 war. Indian army was not lacking in anything, but the world was with Pakistan, especially the US, during the time of President Richard Nixon and the Seventh Fleet. Today, America may be a friend of India, and to feel that India has started leaning towards the US and the West is they have reached that level that they can afford to now be friendly in equal terms with the US. And this is a point which has to be understood by all of us. There are a number of Indians living in the US and Canada, and so they may say, no, no, America is America, and they have always been very good friends. America is nobody's friend. America is a businessman. They are a business class and they are capitalists. They want to control. They are new imperialists. They want to control Asia. They have controlled Asia. What they have done in Iraq was for those oil wells. They are after the oil. Now, because India does not have oil, India has other resources, they will try to control India. And the second most important reason is they want a counterbalance to China that they dread. And it is rather strange but true that Sino Indian relations have still not reached that level where they should have been. And for which, of course, both sides are equally responsible. You cannot absolve China, nor can you absolve India. But then we, on either sides, Beijing and New Delhi must understand that Washington D.C. will always try to fish in troubled waters, and that these troubled waters are the not very, if not very cordial relations that China and India share. And they have played that game. And today, when we say that China is trying to bully by asserting their influence over the Arctic, etc., why not? If the US can play uh, their cards and play their games in Asia, then who on earth can refuse those rights to China? They are equally, they have an equal right. And in fact, India also has the right to do so, but India may not be at the moment in that position to assert themselves as a nation in the Arctic region. But that day will isn't far, that will come. Now, China and India together, if they become friends, if they are together as confederation, and if Pakistan joins, nothing like it, it will be, as we say in Hindi, Sone pe Suhaga, it will be a win win situation. And it will lead to a situation where the non Asian powers, US and the West, will have to think twice before entering Asia. Their business interests will remain in Asia, but they will have to work and they will have to do business on the lines, on the terms laid down by the Asian nations. Today, because Asia is just not united as a continent, as an entity, or even as a confederation, Asia has yet to form an entity. The Western nations, the non Asian nations, are taking undue advantage of it. Coming back to non alignment, India's non alignment has helped India, as we have seen, in in allowing it to grow economically as well as a military power. And now, with the changing world scenario where Indrani Bagchi had a few days ago in the Times of India talked about Cold War II. Yes, perhaps a neo Cold War is starting between China and the US. And this is very obvious because a unipolar world never was and never will be a benefit to anybody, including India. And with the rise of China, we will again be seeing a bipolar world as it had existed during the days when Soviet Union was at its peak of power, at the zenith of power. And as far as Russia is concerned, they will come back with a new, renewed strength, with a renewed vigor. And I'm sure they will also play their role in world politics. Because Russia and former Soviet Union have never been imperialistic in nature. They have never tried to exploit. No, they have never tried to, the way the Western imperialist nations have. They have their hold. If they did move into Afghanistan, that was because they had to counter the US designs, the US imperialist designs, which the new imperialist influence that they had increased by entering Pakistan. And Pakistan was apprehensive about it, because of which they got carried away into the CENTO bloc. And with the CENTO, they started supporting terrorism, the Mujahideens against the communists. Thus, a fundamentalist, a reactionary ideology started taking, getting a push, started getting started getting support from the imperialist nations against a progressive communist ideology. And the results are today being seen by all. Pakistan having become a hub of terrorism and religious fundamentalism, and the people of Pakistan are facing it. Now, communists have never been fundamentalists, they have never been imperialists. Yes, they have their ideology and they have respected their ideology laid down by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, mainly Karl Marx. So, to compare them with the West would be absolutely wrong. And even in Europe, Russia has always been quite different as a nation, even in the during the last 2 centuries, the 19th and the 20th century. They were never into getting into all expansionist designs, it was because the West tried to act tough with them. They tried to damage them from after the Bolshevik Revolution. They had to adopt, Russia had to adopt a very stern policy towards the West. So, non alignment continues to be a policy which will be beneficial to India even if the Cold War starts again. Maybe we see a tripolar world, three poles. The Soviet Union, if it comes back, then it will be three pole. There will be a tripolar world, and now it might continue to be bipolar between US and China. And there is every possibility that Soviet Union, if it comes back to its original form, China and Soviet Union, Russia and China now share a pretty cordial equation, and their relationship continues. Thus, communists are able to reassert themselves across the world. And India, by virtue of its non aligned policy, can develop the relationship with China the way it should be and come to up to a level that it will be a situation where Asia will start taking lessons from these two nations and will try getting together as a confederation. This is a this is not a pipe dream. This will be a reality, and this has to become a reality because in the unification of Asia as a confederation lies the benefit, lies the progress of this continent. Asia will no longer remain a geographical entity. The Asian fraternity will come together. And the Cold War that the thinkers are being apprehensive about, it will not be something that India has to bother, but India will have to play their role, will have to play their games, will have to play their part with prudence, with caution, and with maturity, which they have as a nation. And the Indian leadership, I'm sure, whoever sits on the chair, be it the BJP as they are now, or maybe a Congress, or maybe even if the left comes to power in India, which would be a real dream come true because they have to come one day in this country. India needs at least 10 to 20 years of communist rule, even if it is not a single party rule, but they do need it because that is going to turn the wheel of progress in a more positive direction and at a pace that is much faster. And the non-aligned policy for India will continue to be a benefit because India will not get involved into those conflicts that these power blocks might indulge in. We have seen the Cold War in the first part between Soviet Union and the US, and now if China and US start having a Cold War, India will have a role to play in a different manner. But India must remember, and India will have to keep one thing in mind, that they will have to focus more on the continent, that is Asia, and besides focusing on the world, they will have to focus on the continent. And America and the West as a whole, the non-Asian powers, must get this message very clear in their minds that they can be our best friends, but they cannot be our masters. They cannot be our masters. Be it India, be it China, be it Pakistan or Bangladesh. They may be smaller countries. Bangladesh may be very small. Sri Lanka might be very small. But Asia is in itself an entity, and the Asian countries are competent enough to take care of themselves. They don't need non-Asian support. And non-alignment can be a system, a policy that will get that acceptance among the nations of the SAARC in the P times to come. It will be gradual, and thereafter among the other countries of Asia. So, thus the thus the approach of India as a non-aligned country, as the third world, as we have been referred to many a times, will has and will continue to be uh, it will continue to be a future, it will continue to be a, what you can call, a unification of nations, a nations coming together in the form of an alliance, an economic alliance within this continent, because this will help in uniting Asia as a confederation. Non-aligned, the third world that it is being called will be Asia, and that Asia in itself will prove to the world, it has started to prove, and it will prove ultimately to the world that they are what they are. They are a force to reckon with. That's all. Jai Hind, and I would my salute to the Asian fraternity.